Okay.
Okay, I just would like to tell everyone who I'm sending this out to that I had a hafsakat chashmal earlier, and so that's why um, you're coming in the middle of this session on Jephtah's daughter. And thank you to Sue, who was able to keep it going up till this point. And so now I'm going to share the screen with everyone. Share the screen. Um, Okay. All right. So, okay. So that's really the question is, do not know everything you have vowed. What else did he vow? Isn't that interesting? Yes. All right. Okay. So what you have here also is her actually a lament that appears. This is actually, she has the actual lament. Right? Hear, you mountains, my lamentation, and pay attention, you hills, to the tears of my eyes, and be witness, you rocks, of the weeping of my soul. Right? It's very, very poetic, right? You beasts of the forest. I mean, this is really, it's really a lament. It's an actual lament. So we see this in a poetic form as opposed to what we saw earlier. It's a little soppy, so we don't have to read it.
But it is interesting that they uh, look at her as an example of nuns, of women who devote themselves to God.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Yes,
Yes,
yeah,
yes, absolutely. Okay. Um, but even look, even here, oh mother, in vain have you borne your only daughter, because Sheol is like hell, has or
yeah.
the lower world has become my bridal chamber. And on earth, there's only my woman's chamber. So there's all of this, and the white robe that my mother has woven, right? I mean, the fact that she's not getting married, right? It's really she's going into quite a bit of detail here. So this you could almost argue is like modern midrash, right? What did she write when she
Yeah.
heard all the news, right? She didn't go so sweetly to her destination. Okay, Rivka Lubitsch, who's a lecturer and a blogger, and a very well-known Orthodox feminist, and she wrote in the collection, which is now really becoming quite well known. She wrote her own midrash on this, and she also she calls Jephtah's daughter Tanot. Tanot is like somebody who mourns, okay? And this character, Tanot, appears throughout the collection of midrashim that have been published recently. I think they're actually available on Sfaria. And so this is the Hebrew on one side, and this is the English on the other side. And why was she called Tanot? Right, a wailer, a weeper, right? Um, because it is written, and so since long ago, the daughters of Israel go to wail, litanot, right? Litanot, 4 days a year. And they said tanot does not mean wailing, but is the name of Jephtah's daughter, okay? In other words, look at the Hebrew. Um, it makes more sense in the Hebrew. Yamim yamim telachna benot Yisrael litanot. In other words, the women of the daughters of Israel went to Tanot, right? That's her name, okay? And who is Tanot? Bat Yiftach, okay? And what does she do? She sits in heaven and listens to the stories and sits by the Shekhinah and bewails their sorrows in her ear. She prays for them and pleads their right. So Jephtah's daughter here has become full of agency, according to Rivka, right? She's not simply dead. She has a life in the future, and she basically is there very much actually like the Virgin Mary. I wonder if Rivka would be shocked to hear me say something like this, but very much like a figure that they can go to and pray. Like, a lot of women go to Rachel's tomb. And why do they go to Rachel's tomb? Does anyone know why? Yes.
Pray to have children.
Yeah, they go very often to pray to have children. It's one of the places that people go and pray to have children, right? Okay, so Jephtah has a very interesting life, right? In terms of art. So there's an oratorio by Handel. You may not know that. And in this oratorio, sorry, what did I say? I don't know what I said, but there's an English language libretto, which is based on the story. But unlike the original biblical story, an angel intervenes, okay? An angel intervenes to stop the sacrifice. And so Iphis, right, the other name, only needs to dedicate her life to the Lord. In other words, there's intervention here. And here, this particular work of art is called Jephtah's Rash Vow, right? The 19th century. I'll make it a little bit bigger, right? And notice here, she's coming out to greet him. I thought that was the angel, but no. She's coming out to greet him. And look at him. He's utterly, oh my gosh. He remembers his, it's a tragic picture that you have here, except for the fact that we have no sympathy for him because he shouldn't have made that stupid vow to begin with to endanger his, and in the recitative, in the actual, if any of it you want to hear it, you can go to YouTube and you can actually hear it you could write it down for yourselves, 154:33, right? You could actually hear it, and here's the actual chorus where they're singing, and she lives, right? Happy Iphis. Iphis, is that how you pronounce it? I'm not sure. Shalt thou live, while to thee the virgin choir tune their harps of golden wire and their yearly tribute give. Happy Iphis, all thy days, pure angelic virgin state, shalt thou live in ages late, crown thee with immortal praise. Okay, so she's living and they're all singing. You could just imagine, it's Handel, so you could just imagine the singing that's going on. Okay. So here's another picture with the sacrifice, but not of Jephtah's daughter, but of
Agamemnon.
Agamemnon's daughter, Iphigenia, or Iphigenia, I'm not sure
Iphigenia.
It's right, it's a soft G, right, Iphigenia. Okay, so here we have a picture, and here in some places she is a sacrifice, all right? In others, she is rescued by Artemis, right? And in the version where she is saved, she goes to the Taurians, I don't know who they are, and meets her brother Orestes, okay? So this is, a picture of the sacrifice, an 18th century, a 17th century picture. Okay, let's go on. Here we have another picture. Obviously, we know what's happening here, okay? We don't have to spend too much time here with that particular picture. Here's another ancient picture, 15th century, all right? Notice he's taking out his sword. She's coming out. It's interesting what she comes out with, right? Not timbrels, right? She comes out with a harp here, okay? It's another picture, an engraving, right? Oh my gosh, look at this one here. What does this look like? Forget about the woman for a minute.
He's there to collect the blood or her
No, forget about the woman. I'm covering the picture. Oh no, I guess I'm not covering the picture. I'm covering for myself. So you don't see me covering the picture. Let me just, I'll move it down here. If you just look at this, what does that remind you of?
The Akedah.
Exactly. It looks exactly like the many pictures we've seen of the Akedah. And then you're right. What is that little bowl for?
Blood.
Blood, or to collect her head, right? And it's not clear, right? Notice how they make her look very, very sexy here in this picture. I mean, it's really, This is almost a pornographic picture, as far as I'm concerned. Especially when I made it as big as I did. Okay. Here's another one. This is simply in color, right? Of that particular picture. It's the same one, except that here there's some women around here, I guess, or there's other people. But this is clearly copying that original picture, and she doesn't look, right? She's a little bit more demure in terms of the way she looks, but it's a color picture of that earlier one. And here's, again, Jephtah's vow, his daughter greeting him. This is obviously, look at, again, the tragic look on his face. He understands what's happening here. Okay, some more pictures. Okay, here's another one. This looks very much like the Iphigenia. I've seen pictures of the Iphigenia, which looks very much like this particular picture. Okay, as you can see, there are a lot of people have lots and lots of imagination with the pictures, okay? Lots of imagination, including in modern times as well. Here's one last picture here. You notice for some reason her breasts are, removed here, but okay. So in someone whose name is Evelyn, I don't remember who she was and why I have this here. But basically, what you have here, which we've noticed already, is that it's a story of scapegoating. In other words, she basically is scapegoating for coming out, all right? And so she's the one who ends up being punished. The fact that he does not take responsibility for what has happened. It sounds a little bit familiar for what's happening in our country nowadays. That people don't take responsibility for getting themselves and the whole country into trouble to begin with, all right? So Jephtah does not admit that he did not trust God, all right? Now that's very interesting. Why did he make the vow to begin with? And that is perhaps the great critique of the rabbis. Why did he make that vow?
He was trying to guarantee a win in the victory in the battle.
Yeah. So that's really very, very interesting. So so at the end of the this particular blog where I copied it from Evelyn's Reflections, I really don't remember where I copied it from, but reading this story, I also find myself wondering why Jephtah's daughter did not fight back. Why didn't she resist? I mentioned earlier, why didn't she run away when she had the 2 months to, why didn't she resist this injustice done to her, right? When I have been scapegoated or blamed for something that I didn't do, I initially want to lash back and set the story straight. I want to stand up and say, no, that's not right. Reading the story of Jephtah's daughter, I don't understand why she didn't fight back. Intellectually, I understand that resisting at this time in history would have been extremely challenging, but I can't help but think she surely could have done something. Isn't that interesting? So what is this author doing to Jephtah's daughter?
She's putting the blame back on her.
Right. She's re-victimizing the victim. Isn't that interesting? Okay. Okay, we have another image of Jephtah's daughter, all right, which inspired this quilt. Her wandering around the mountainside, all right, taking the 2 months, all right. And she is accepting her situation on her own terms, all right. It is her and her friends' courage to be a community of solidarity and support in the face of such awful treatment that gives me hope. I'm not sure. Maybe I took this from Evelyn's blog. I'm not sure exactly where that came from. I apologize. Okay, let's move on. A very important source of early commentary on Jephtah is Phyllis Tribble's very well-known Text of Terror, where she basically talks about 4 different people, and one is Hagar, the other is Tamar, who's raped, not Judah's Tamar, but Tamar, who's raped, an unnamed woman, that's the concubine of Gibeah, and the daughter of Jephtah. And she has here these are her texts of terror, and she looks upon that as a text of terror. And in her article, not this article, but in a different article, she actually writes about this is interesting. So she writes the sacrifice of, and I'll make it a little bit bigger so you all could read it. The sacrifice of the daughter of Jephtah documents the powerlessness and abuse of a child in the days of the judges. No interpretation can save her from the Holocaust or mitigate the foolish vow of her father, but we can move through the indictment of the father to claim sisterhood with the daughter. Retelling her story, we emphasize the daughters of Israel to whom she reaches out in the last days of her life. Thus, we underscore the postscript, discovering in the process an alternative translation. And this is what she writes. Traditionally, the ending has read, she, the daughter, had never known man, and it became a custom in Israel that the daughters of Israel went year by year to lament the daughter. Since the verb become, however, is a feminine form, the word it, right? It. Another reading is likely, because in Hebrew you don't have a neuter, right? But in English you do have a neuter. Although she had never known a man, right? Nevertheless, she became accustomed, not it became accustomed, but she became accustomed. Isn't that interesting? So now we have a new way of understanding this, all right? The unnamed virgin child becomes a tradition in Israel because the women with whom she chooses to spend her last days do not let her pass into oblivion. They establish a living memorial. Interpreting such stories of terror on behalf of women is surely then another way of challenging the patriarchy of Scripture. Notice that she wrote, Phyllis Dribble wrote this in 1982, and her book in 1984 came out later. So that's very interesting for you to know. Okay, and she actually also has puts this in a poem, into a poem in her book, right? And she actually she creates a poem here. If there's time, we'll come back to it. I don't think there'll be time. I want to get to Vanessa's. So the other thing is here is the fact that Jephtah made a request in an improper manner, this is what I told you earlier. So this was the Midrash Rabbah. This is what I was telling you before. I don't have to repeat it. You should just believe what I said. Between the two of them, the poor maiden perished, and both of them incurred responsibility for her blood. So that is that both of them, as I mentioned, both of them were so full of themselves that they couldn't save her life. Okay. So now we come to Vanessa's, and I see that Vanessa has joined us. Oh, Yofi, very nice. Vanessa, could you show your face, or you're on an iPad? You are, Yofi, wonderful. So now we come to Vanessa's, I don't know if any of you read my blog, but recently Vanessa and I have been in correspondence with one another. And so I was thrilled to get her letter, and inspired me to write my blog this week about community. And then I invited her to join. Just a few minutes ago, I invited her to join. So I don't know when you came on, because I wasn't here for a while myself. Okay, so this is from chapter 8 from Jephtah's daughter, which she calls being there for friends. Okay, so Vanessa, I'm going to let you read the first page. Can you see it? To read it? You can make it bigger. And then afterwards, Norman would read the second page, and Louise the third page. And who else is here on the screen? Joyce. Wait, you read already. Barbara. Barbara, what number are we up to?
4.
4. And Margie, 5. And Stevie, 6. Okay, so and then maybe she'll tell us a little bit about her book afterwards. Okay, so you start, Vanessa.
Okay. Jephthah's daughter's own story. On the morning the young women of Mitzpah had seen their fathers ride off to battle, not again would they ever stop leaving. They returned to sit together in Shelah's house. They had thought to take the morning meal together and bake flatbreads on the stone, but found themselves not hungry at all. This time they felt a deep foreboding, Shelah especially. She was the daughter of Jephtah, who had been called to command this battle. She was the tallest of the friends, the most robust, the one who could always push her friends to sustain themselves and stay strong. On this morning, she felt too distracted to initiate the baking. She just heated water on the fire and made an infusion of dried mint. They warmed themselves until the sun rose by holding their plate cups in both hands and sitting close together. Anat, Ye'irah, Na'amah, and Shelah had been friends since their baby days, when their mothers when their mothers nursed side by side. Inseparable, they called each other sisters in light forever, ever. Daughters of soldiers of the Gilead community, they had grown up seeing their fathers go off to battle, and they became skilled readers of their father's moods. From the way he packed his gear to the way he readied himself to leave, a girl could discern her father's measure of courage or terror. In the clench of his embrace, she would know his resolve or sense his trembling. Upon his return, she could tell if he would be terrorized by nightmares of swords.
Shelah could tell from her father's precision as he prepared the blankets for his horse that more was at stake for him this time than ever before. How will it end? Asked Anat, bird-like and fidgety, who absorbed herself in the dramatic possibilities any outcome might personally afford her. Will I be dancing toward my father with garlands in my hair, welcoming him home as the victor, singing, I will praise you, Lord, with all my heart. I will rejoice, for you destroy the wicked. The enemy is no more. Or will I be darkening my house and my heart forever, covering myself in sackcloth, lowering myself to the floor in mourning, chanting, how long, my God, will you ignore me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? There isn't a flower here the horses haven't trampled on, Anat continued. We'll have to go up to the hills to make any decent garlands. Your life could unfold either way, said Yairah, weary of it all, and wearied of Anat's attempts to make her own role in the warfare seem significant when young women were so clearly marginal. Of the friends, Yairah was the only one still waiting for her body to mature, but her soul had always been an old one. She did not tolerate drama for its own sake. You never know if your father will return or not. There is nothing a girl can do but wait. My mother insists I can do something. I can pray and hold the family together, but I'm done with that. It feels like all I'm doing is keeping busy, distracting myself as I twist my spindle, affirming that I make no difference at all.
Was it not possible, wondered bubbly Naama, ever the idealist, that one day the girls and women could welcome their fathers home for good? The women would praise God. See what the Lord has done. He puts a stop to war throughout the world, breaking the bow, snapping the spear, consigning the wagons of war to the flames. This is exactly what she said each time the fathers departed for battle. As she started chanting her verses, Anat and Shelah chimed in with her, their voices mimicking the old granny who circled the village, also chanting these words each morning and evening. Enough, Naama, of the lovely words, said Yairah. They are the fantasies of women's prayers. War entices men. In the battlefield, they give birth to a part of themselves they'd otherwise never know. If they didn't have real enemies, they'd invent them. Shelah believed Yairah was right about peace being women's fantasy. She pictured herself with strings in her hand, fashioning Jephtah's broken bow into a harp. She imagined his unfocused face. Without an enemy to destroy, he could find no purpose. Without an enemy, how would he release his explosive anger? If he could no longer kill the enemy who threatened him, might he even turn more violently on those he loved?
Was it not possible,
Wait,
wondered
wait,
Bubbly?
I'm trying to move into the
Oh, yeah,
next.
I see, yeah.
Wait, 1 second. Okay, wait, yeah. Sorry, okay.
Shayla thought she might finally confide in her friends about her father's rage that frequently exploded out of nowhere. Her mother witnessed it. Though she said nothing, she cowered, staying away until he calmed. Then she plied him with heavy foods that put him to sleep. For sure, the soldiers under his command had to have witnessed his rages. Maybe what made him a monster at home, coupled with a gift for devious strategy, made him a star in the battlefield. Shayla still hesitated to speak of her father's rages to her friends. It wasn't all of who he was, she rationalized each time. It came of his harsh childhood, being ostracized by his brothers. Why talk of something you couldn't change? She had never kept anything from her sisters in life but this. Now there was a new troubling confidence she felt she had to withhold from her friends. It was what she had overheard outside her window, or at least thought she had overheard, in the moments before the men rode down from Mitzpah. Had she been dreaming? Unlikely, as she remembered leaning up against her cool window as the men gathered before the dawn. There was the sound of her father's voice, but she couldn't make out his words. This vow, if I am victorious, sacrifice the first soul. What was he saying? Unthinkable. Banish the thought. A nightmare, a conversation misheard, taken out of context.
Within days, the time feeling longer than it actually was, the fathers returned home from war triumphant. The sound of their singing was even louder than the pounding of their horses. The daughters scurried to prepare themselves to dance, each about to perform first for her own father. They would fall into their father's arms, pull them indoors, feed them, and cushion them with softness. They would then assemble as a group to perform the traditional welcoming home the warrior dance for all the soldiers, first honoring their fathers with a warm, loving gaze, then taking surreptitious glances at the young single men who might catch their eyes. On her head, Shayla placed the garland of cyclamen and poppies she had been preparing as she wandered in the low hills alone earlier that day, pondering the words her father had spoken before he departed. From her window, she now saw her father sitting on his horse. He did not move to dismount. Her friends' fathers and the young men who had gone with them in battle waited on their stilled horses behind him. They looked downward as if they had come to honor a fallen comrade. The singing had stopped. She didn't understand. Why were they there and not going first to be received by their own families?
Who's reader number?
6.
Stevie, if that's you, you have to unmute.
So I'm the last reader. Is that number 6?
I guess so. No, there's one more reader after you, so you should read.
Okay, she breathed in slowly. She danced out her door, but not into her father's arms, into his rage. He howled. She felt as if his spear had gone right through her. It's all your fault, he stormed. You stupid, stupid girl. Whatever were you thinking? Look what you made me do. What have I done? She demanded, knowing she had done nothing at all but act in the proper way and display the proper sentiments. Sheila waited for someone, anyone, to speak. The soldiers were silent. The mothers and the elders who had crept out of their houses were silent. There was no voice of protest, only the screams of her girlfriends. Their mothers took no chances and pushed them back into their own homes, forbidding them to come out, lest Jephtah's vow be contagious. Hearing her father's explanation, Sheila knew she was to die. This was the will of her father, and apparently the will of the village and of God. She went silent, but loudly so. She refused to rage against death with an anger that mirrored her father's. Her decision was clear and immediate. If she had but days to live, she would embrace the familiar blessings of this life, celebrating them with her friends, the ones who loved her best and knew her best. This would be her remonstration. I will not die yet, Shayla told her father, and walked past him, and past all the soldiers who would not meet her gaze. She went from door to door, gathering her sisters in life forever, ever, pulling them out of their houses despite their mother's protests, telling them they should prepare to go with her to the hills. We will live together, cook, make fires, watch animals, and sleep side by side, she told Yaira. Then Anat, then Naamah. We will celebrate our being grown women.
Okay, Geraldine, would you like to read the last one? I guess I didn't count properly.
Okay. What are we going to do? They wanted to know when they assembled. They were ashamed they had no ideas of their own. If I thought there was something any of you could do to save my life, I would have asked you. But there is nothing to be done, and I will not spend my last days grasping at straws. You will help me uphold my dignity. Live together with me in the hills. Imagine a perfect world with me one day after another. She bade Anat, Yahira, and Naamah to sing their old song, How Good It Is When Sisters Dwell Together. They sang this to her, placing the garlands they had woven for their fathers at her feet. They left as soon as they could gather up their supplies. What did they do in the hills for 2 months? None of the young women would ever say when they returned, but they did declare that 4 days of memorial would be kept each year for their friend. The story has come down that they spent their time lamenting what Shelah would end her life without ever knowing the pleasure of lying with a man or having a child. When Anat, Yahira, and Naamah were grandmothers, they heard this was the story being told. They laughed. Wouldn't you know, they said, we did nothing of the sort.
Okay, so first of all, Vanessa, could you show up again? I mean, I actually have your book in front of me right now, and I'm looking at my notes. It's a little unfair to ask you to talk about something you wrote so many years ago, about 20 years ago. But you may not even remember what you wrote. Would you? I was struck anew by some of the things, and I even underlined them. And so we'd love to hear from you. How do you feel hearing this so many years later?
Well, so first of all, Naomi, I'm just incredibly honored to that you're using this material to teach your beautiful class, and the way that you all read out loud was very moving to me, and I thank you for that, because you made the story come alive for me. I confess that as I heard it read, I happened to be struck by things from my own life that found their way into the story. I'm looking at the cyclamen on my table. There's always cyclamen on my table once, and so I knew where that came from. But things that were far deeper, some things very beautiful and some things very painful that came from my life that got woven into that story. And I think that's what, when we write Midrash, that is feminist Midrash, we bring our lives into the story, and try to tell our own truths. And I notice that the themes of what we tell people, what we don't tell people, and what we keep silence about, and what stories do emerge, stories that might not be really true or accurate. That's a big theme. So I was sort of reflecting in and out, and I just thank you for the opportunity to have this pastiche of this bricolage of reflections.
Okay. By the way, her book, which I actually have in front of me, and I just looked at it. The story is totally almost every other word is underlined in my copy of this. But some of the things I notice now, and by the way, what she says at the end, because this is only a small part of this, is afterwards she has Jephtah's daughter speaks to us, and she actually says, you probably don't remember this, but you wrote that every time you read this story, it seems to you as if it's some sort of pornography. And that's really very interesting, because when we looked at some of the pictures before, they really were almost pornographic in terms of the whole idea of men reveling in women's death. I mean, even look at this particular picture that you have here with the, which is also paired together with the sacrifice of Isaac here. So, I mean, it's really very, very interesting. Anyway, I just was looking at some of the things that I wrote here, and Vanessa, I don't know if this appeared in my review of your book, but I wrote that this book is really about Vanessa. That, in other words, when I reviewed it, I said she's quite open about it in the introduction. She got religion, in quotation marks, and now is reading this into biblical characters, right? Now, that is so true. That is exactly, I mean, Sue, who writes Midrash, who started our class today, I don't know if you were here when I didn't have lights on, but Sue.
No, I'm only able to pop in for a tiny bit.
Okay, so anyway, Sue started the class for me, and she writes Midrash, and so I trusted her, to take over. And the whole idea is that's exactly what Midrash is very often, is that we read ourselves into the biblical story, which makes the story living both for us and also for others as well. So let's just quickly take a look here. My friend Donna Kirschenbaum, who you may know, Vanessa, had this, who was born 1940, so he's about my generation, has something called the Holy Bible. And on the cover, or he has this picture of Jephtah's daughter lying on twigs, right? And Donna, when she saw this picture, told me it reminded her of Deuteronomy 22.6. If you come across a bird's nest beside the road, either in a tree or on the ground, and the mother is sitting on the young or on the eggs, do not take the mother with the young. Isn't that an amazing association to have with this particular picture, right? And I just, suddenly, of course, it reminds me of the sacrifice of Isaac as well, who's on the twigs. And here's Barry Moser with the Akedah story. And again, here you have your twigs. And here's Abraham with the knife and his son not lying down, but sitting up. So, and here you have Jephtah's daughter lying down. So it's a little reversal of what we're usually used to seeing. Here's another picture, and then I don't know if any of you know Amos Oz's story where the jackals howl, but you might want to look for it because it's a modern rendition of the story. It's called Upon This Evil Earth, and you actually have what he calls prose narrative with Gilad, the Gileadite living, where he lives, and the whole, the alienation of him from his brothers. But here you have a modern Israeli caught between the obsessed Israelis and obsessed Arabs, right? Neither willing to acknowledge the vision and values of the other. So of course he's reading himself, right? It's his Midrash, if you want, reading himself into this particular story. Adam Kirsch, who reviewed the story, he says that Jephtah, as Oz tells the story, Jephtah becomes a spokesman for a whole line of wrong children in biblical history. He invents a backstory for the daughter slayer. He imagines him as the illegitimate son of an Israelite and foreign woman, persecuted by his siblings, who only wants to be accepted by his father and his father's God. And then he also talks about the world of the kibbutz, where everyone is there are howling jackals and how fragile life in the kibbutz. And today, when I was rereading this as I was preparing it for the class, I must tell you what these words were just unbelievable. Norman, would you read them? The world of the kibbutz, what's in red here?
The world of the kibbutz, as Oz portrays it, is one constantly aware of being under threat. The howling jackals of the title are a reminder that just outside the guarded walls of the settlement, predators roam, that the kibbutz is a fragile, man-made oasis in a wilderness. The inner circle, the circle of lights, keeps guard over our houses and over us against the accumulated menace outside, but it is an ineffective wall. It cannot keep out the smells of the foe and his voices. At night, the voices and the smells touch our skin like tooth and claw. The atmosphere is very much like that of a Western, with the kibbutz functioning as an outpost in Indian territory, always waiting for the next attack.
Wow.
Wow,
Well, this is interesting because we're reading this now, and this was written in August 2012. But, look at it in the perspective of what happened to the kibbutzes in the Gaza envelope in October 2023.
Right. I got the chills when I was reading this.
Yeah.
It's just like unbelievable to read this today. And finally, you have Gila Kane, this is Gila Kane over here. She looks like she created she's one of the founders of the Israeli Rabbinic Women's Group, B'not Dinah. I actually spoke to them once. Ariella, my daughter, is also one of the founding members of this group. Anyway, she actually wrote about the story here, and she refers to the Midrash that I mentioned earlier, that Jephtah had the opportunity of going to the high priest, right? In the background, the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, is shrieking, and the children are crying on the mountains for the lost youth of Yiftach's daughter. This is us today. This was written in 2021. This is our generation of adults arrogantly acting as if we can decide who and what to sacrifice for our life of comfort. You can go and look at, you can Google it and find the whole article there. And then finally, we come to what I mentioned earlier, which is Yiftach's letter, but I'm going to have to, if some of you would like to see it, it's in Hebrew. I could show it to you afterwards. But
I want to see it. I want to see it.
Okay, well, you'll still stay on afterwards. But before, would anyone like to say something before I stop the, that's not connected to politics?
I'd like to just say one thing to Vanessa. The last line of the story, I so identified with. I mean, that the whole idea that after this terrible, terrible thing, vow and how it's going to be realized, the fact that she chooses to spend 2 months with her friends kind of really spoke to me. And this idea that they had their own life up there, and you'll never know what went on. It was between us girls. I really, really enjoyed that.
And I assume, Vanessa, that when it says how good it is when sisters dwell together, that's Hine Matovu Manayim Shevet Achim Gam Yachad. So instead of Shevet Achim, Shevet Achot Gam Yachad, right? So I assume that that's
of course. I was looking for that. I was looking for that resonance. And thank you, Sue.
Right. Anyway, would anyone else like to add something? We could talk about politics afterwards, but then I'm going to stop the sharing.
Thank you,
Thank
you, Naomi, and thank you, Vanessa.
Okay, so I'm going to stop the share.
Thank you all so much. Thank you for letting me join in.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording. Stop the recording. Okay.